Hi, my name's Thomas. I'm the guest blogger for ReMode, and today I'm joined by the very wonderful, talented Christopher Reid. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I was just going to start by asking you where you're from and how you became interested in fashion and textiles.
I'm originally from Irvine and the it's kind of like southwest coast of Scotland, like just outside of Glasgow. I think I originally kind of became interested in fashion and textiles a lot later than the other people that were around me and that I was studying with, because for so long I thought I was going to go into painting or printmaking or something like that was much more kind of like in the kind of the world of art as opposed to design. But I moved to Glasgow and I did a portfolio prep at Cardonald, which was like they just kind of like set me on the right path, and I ended up making all these kind of badly made like sort of like slips that were kind of made from materials that a slip dress just shouldn't be made from. From there I was like, oh god, like I think fashion's what I want to do. And then from there I went to Edinburgh College of Art, and I've just finished my undergrad there last March. So yeah.
Were you caught up in the kind of COVID moment, or did you manage to like finish before then?
No, like, really sadly, we were kind of caught up in it all, and it was pretty much like over like a weekend that everyone sort of had to like clear out like what we'd all been preparing for like 4 years.
Mhm.
It was like longer than 4 years, and just kind of like put it all into a box and leave and go home. Class of 2020, it was really
Yeah.
quite hopeful, but not in a way.
I know that you've like just recently graduated, but do you feel like you have a sense of like where you start your design process? Like, have you kind of got like a consistent idea, or are you still like trying out new things all the time?
I think I'm kind of starting to get a bit more of an idea of how it works best for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even just what we were kind of saying about COVID and how everything kind of to shut down, I think without the lockdown, I probably wouldn't have started doing what I'm doing now. Because it was all kind of this, it all came about because of the space that I was in, and it was so small. I could really only work on like specific things. I think that really did, it helped me kind of figure out like, okay, going from working on like full looks, and it was like sort of like tailoring and lingerie, and there was like print and embroidery, and to then have to go to like one thing and focus on that one thing and just be really considerate about everything that I was doing, which I kind of started with like these sort of corset bodice pieces. And I think within that idea of I just had this one piece that was kind of going to have to be quite summative of everything that I wanted to say and what I wanted to do, that made me just be a little bit more thoughtful and kind of really have to address like, okay, what works best for me, what isn't working.
So for you, do you start like with a kind of like an idea, an emotion, or like a piece of material?
It always seems to start now anyway, it always seems to start with, I think, the idea of maybe it's usually maybe like a film, or like
Mm-hmm.
the idea of me existing in this kind of different world or this different reality where there's something that feels quite, because I really love things like the Sleepy Hollow, the Tim Burton film, is always such a, I think it's such a go-to for me, because I love just that idea of the world, and there's just something kind of twisted, so it makes it just a little bit left of center.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that idea of kind of trying to create my own little reality and that world that's gonna kind of play a part in the person that then I'm trying to design for, which is maybe sometimes it's like a slightly different version of me, or how I would exist in that world. Yeah, it's that idea of that person, and then that sort of tends to influence everything else from the materials. I feel like it sounds a little bit kind of abstract, but it's usually quite simple. It's maybe it's just I become really obsessed with things quite easily, and there's always that thing, that kind of person that's running through it all, that tends
Mm-hmm.
to be the main anchor for everything that I do, I think.
Could you take us through your first thoughts when you got your design package? Where did it
uh,
take you?
I think my like first thoughts was just getting like any kind of like fabric or materials like donated is just, it's a buzz. It's such a buzz. So it was quite nice just to have something new that I maybe hadn't, like, because I tend to sort of source maybe from like a dead stock website or eBay,
Mhm.
and it's usually for something quite specific. So just to be given like a pack of things that I hadn't sourced, that I didn't know what they were going to be. That was really good. It was quite, it kind of like sort of throws you off in quite a good way to just think about what you're going to do, how you're going to kind of work with it. And there were some really like absolutely gorgeous curtains and different kind of like things, yeah, like kind of like curtain materials, which were like some of the first samples that I made, they were from curtains. So I always quite like a good kind of like an old floral. It's kind of had a bit of a second life, or it's going to have a second life. It's great. It was really exciting to get them all.
So did you go straight to cutting things up, or were you kind of like drawing and like thinking about shapes and stuff?
I was quite immediately attracted to going straight into it. Something that I haven't really done since I was in uni was I really like to kind of draw and to illustrate, and I kind of illustrated sort of specific little like wood carvings and etchings from different like handbooks on witchcraft and witch trials over the floral fabrics that we got. It was nice to have like an extra element of just really kind of like going like something that felt like handwork and kind of like handcraft on top of all of that.
Is there any chance we could have a little look now? Just because I haven't seen them yet, so I'd quite like to see them.
All right, okay, yeah, of course. I've got so this was like the kind of the top piece. I really like that kind of idea of just like the really, like I love that kind of like the fabric with all the kind of the botanical paintings on it. And then I wanted to do, so the front, it's a little kind of circle of witches and
Oh,
demons.
it's so cool.
And then the back, I've got like another like kind of witch with like a broomstick there. And then the other piece that I made, kind of a simple, I quite like a little mini skirt. So I just made a little mini skirt that kind of wraps around, and you've got like kind of like the devil and like a little witch with a circle of demons. And then I kind of blew up some of the pictures from like the Berwick witch trials. There's like a wood carving of that. So I've done like some of them, yeah. That was quite nice to get to, yeah, I think spend a little bit of time kind of like going over everything and not just kind of use the fabric as was. It was nice to get to add something over the top. I really like print and hadn't really done print in ages, so it was great to play about with that again.
What kind of materials do you go for, and where do you get them from?
Especially since kind of like finishing my degree and kind of like being in lockdown, I think because I spent so much time inside and kind of like in this, it almost felt like just being in the one room. A lot of like the really like the heavy curtain fabrics and upholstery fabrics were such a go-to, because they were just there. They were kind of like all around me when everything hadn't locked down. Edinburgh, when I was kind of studying, Edinburgh was so good for different charity shops having all these, like, if you kind of like, if you knew what ones to go to, you knew what ones, like all like the really old people that were like a little bit eccentric, that had like been in Edinburgh for like their full life, like where they donated everything to. And they would just have like the weirdest things, like all these kind of like, I don't know, like tapestry pillows that were just like covered in like kittens and these big like gold tassels. And you could find like so many things like that so easily. It was all a bit eclectic, but I think it did kind of have, I think in my head anyway, it kind of had like a bit of a flow through of something that I guess quite homely and maybe like a little bit twee, something like that. I'm quite drawn to as well. I quite like I worked quite a lot with sort of like silk, and I think because I really like sort of slip dresses and kind of like 90s, I would always say it's kind of a go-to, like quite sort of sexy kind of fabrics with like lace, or even like some things to do with like leather, things that have quite a lot of connotations, I guess, lingerie-esque and underwear and materials like that. I think that are kind of just like evoke a mood really easily. But saying that as well, I do quite like materials maybe that are like a little bit flatter, that you can kind of draw on top of or kind of like embellish really easily and kind of act as like, or just a really good base to kind of turn into like what you need it to be.
So you've kind of talked about like how you source these, and it's all like a lot of secondhand materials and garments that you draw upon. Are there kind of any other ways that you engage with sustainability in your practice?
I think a lot of the time it tends to be how you can kind of go past sustainability more than just like the materials themselves. Because it is quite easy to kind of just to like look at like a dead stock website and be like, oh, okay, that's great, that's perfect.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to be a little bit more, I guess, kind of thoughtful in certain things that maybe would be the way that you source boning, or to do with the eyelets, which is something that I'm kind of in the process of sampling right now, because at the moment I do use metal eyelets, but I've been looking at kind of more traditional ways of sort of like hand finishing the where the eyelets would be, which obviously it does offset everything in terms of the time that you're putting into the garment and then how much it would cost if you're then selling it on. Even I guess things like that with the way that you're kind of presenting things to a consumer, which is never to say that it's like going to become like a mass market thing, but just to have more control in the sense of working in a made to order way, I think works so much better, to be able to pass something on to someone else and know that they're not going to throw it away in like 2 weeks when they're bored of it, or if they've worn it, because there's something that feels quite treasured about it. It's quite like a precious thing. I think that's definitely something that I always try to keep a bit in my mindset with when I'm making.
I love that you, bring in, it's not just materials, but it's also about the changing the way that we relate to clothes and understand them and value them, not just like in a monetary sense, but also in like a kind of emotional sense. I'm wanting to like treasure and care for these things and hold on to them.
There's pieces that I've made and it's maybe had like just like a tiny amount of like a bit of lace or a bit of ribbon that I've like taken off like a doll or something, and I like that idea of something that does feel like it's not a throwaway thing. It's something that's going to be kept, and I think that does affect what you were saying about how people relate to clothes and relate to clothing and how they feel about buying it and how they feel about wearing it as well.
I guess kind of like leading on from this, like how we are imagining like people's relationship to clothes changing. How do you imagine the future of fashion? Like, what do you think is going to happen next?
Like literally within the last like 9 months, things have changed quite a lot. Sort of studying, and again, even though it was quite a small year, there was no one in it that seemed to be super obsessed with that like idea of season after season, and then you do like a winter and you do like a resort collection. Everything felt, I think, so much more smaller, and what I guess feel like quite outdated ideas of how to present work and even just how to make work. Everyone just wasn't, people just didn't subscribe to that kind of whole idea of like what it means to be like a successful person in fashion, and people aren't really subscribing to it anymore.
Do you feel like that kind of change in attitude, is that coming from the students or is it coming from like the tutors? Is there any kind of tension there?
For me, it always came from like the students and like the kind of like the student body. Not always, but sometimes. Again, it's like it almost feels like sometimes like a bit of like a generational thing. Like the kind of like the old guard of fashion. There's almost this thing of like they know how it works, and there's like a specific way that it worked for certain people, like the kind of, I guess like the kind of like the Christopher Kanes, or maybe that idea of like you do this and you do that and you show here and you show on schedule, and then you maybe like you'll do like a fragrance and you'll like have a shop on Bond Street or whatever, and there's something that's quite, again, it feels like there's like a way that certain people have in their heads of how to achieve success. And I think for younger people that are kind of like, this is like their first kind of like step into the industry, I think everyone's just a little bit more, maybe a little bit more DIY with it all. It's not on schedule, and it's not about creating work as the seasons go on and you're just doing this thing for like the sake of doing it because you feel like you should be doing it. I think they question things a bit more. I think it's good. I think it's just good to be questioning all those things. Like, why is that still a thing? Why does that still happen?
And then I guess my last question is kind of what's next for you personally?
I'm kind of working on my spring set, which is, it's quite different to like the other pieces that I've made before. It's not as gloomy looking. Everything feels quite kind of like nice, and I think just having a bit of time away from the work that I've done before to kind of come into something new, it's quite nice just to have. It's quite nice as well because I'm getting to work with like a few different people that I've kind of known or like followed for a while now, to get to like interact with like people on like new work that you're like really excited about and don't like hate yet. And then even when we're still in lockdown, just to have something that feels quite like a bit of a nice like kind of like communal effort. I'm quite excited about doing all that now.
It's like, well, can you let people know where we can follow you?
Yeah, I think pretty much like the only place to follow me is on Instagram, which is _ Christopher Reid.
Go check it out, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for making those gorgeous garments. We really look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.